5 seconds later, new technology in the Middle Ages. Our first stop on the tour of the new technology in the Middle Ages is the fascinating windmill. The windmill was one of many new technologies in the Middle Ages that made serf life easier. In the 12th century, European windmills were used for grinding grain, pumping water, and powering machines such as saws. Medieval lords paid for their construction and maintenance by charging the peasants fees for using them. You would have a source of wind energy. A windmill is a machine which converts energy of wind into rotational energy by means of vanes called sails or blades. Originally, windmills were developed for milling grain for food production. In the course of history, the windmill was adapted to many other industrial uses. An important non-milling use is to pump water, either for land drainage or to extract groundwater with wind pumps. This bottle windmill that I have made not only shows the structure of a medieval windmill, but also the uses for it. Now, in this case, I drilled a penny and attached the penny to a string, and the string is looped around a screw. Now, when I turn the veil or the blade, it turns the screw, which lifts the penny. A medieval windmill wouldn't have lifted a penny, but more or less powered machines. It was made in 8000 BC in Mesopotamia. They used it if they had difficulties plowing land. Farmers tilled their fields with wooden moldboard plows. In order to prevent the moldboard from wearing out quickly, plowrights, or blacksmiths, plated it with thin iron strips. Wooden moldboard plows could not be mass-produced or repaired easily because they didn't have standardized designs or parts. Only iron, which could be cast, wrought, or molded, would enable consistent duplication of plows specifically designed for a variety of soils. The watermill. Unlike the windmill, the watermill converts energy from water by using gears. Watermills harness kinetic energy from moving bodies of water, usually rivers or streams, in order to drive machinery and generate electricity. The movement of water drives the water wheel, which in turn powers a mechanical process within the mill itself. The water wheel became the most important source of mechanical power throughout Northern Europe for many centuries.
Three-field crop rotation. The three-field crop rotation was for the serfs. It guided their field work. The three-field crop rotation was like this. One field would be plowed in the fall and sown with wheat and rye. Each serf planted their own strip of land, and they all used the same seed. The second one was plowed and sown to peas, oats, beans, vetches, and barley. And the third field was left fallow from harvest to harvest. And then the next year, the fields would switch places. Women worked beside their husbands and men all day. They also had to care for their families and cook dinner every night. They had the hardest jobs.
Daily life in the Middle Ages.
Serfs were not slaves, but they were prisoners to the lord of the manor. They only had one right, and of course, no freedom. This right was if something was to go wrong in the manor, then the serf could not be displaced. They couldn't even get married to another serf in the manor without the approval of the lord. The only way that a serf could have some kind of privilege was to run away for a year and a day, and then he would be classified as a free man. Serfs were given an amount of land, and that was not a gift. This land they had to harvest and pay taxes to the lord. For about 2 or 3 days a week, the busy seasons such as harvesting and plowing, serfs had to do extra work. The lord of the manor could either give them heavy taxes or make them work to the extremes, but then he might lose all the tenants. Thus, he or she did not burden the serfs, but make them do enough to be classified as such a serf.
Housing for serfs.
Housing. Villages usually consisted of 10 to 60 families living in houses which were called cruck houses. Straws covered the floors and holes were put into the wall as windows. On one end of the hut was where they kept their treasured animals for trade. Houses had latticework structure, and keeping the house together was mud and chopped straw. The roof was thatched. There were no windows or chimney. Each family had an animal that they would use in the day for either work or the animal produced trading goods. At night, the animal had to come inside the house to prevent theft or the animal just simply walking off. This would bring disease into the home. Serfs had no running water, and the water that they did have had many uses. They used the bathroom in a bucket inside the house, and in the morning they threw the contents of the bucket into the local river, which everyone else used for cooking and cleaning and all that good stuff.
Food in a serf's life.
The greater the food in the field meant the more exploding population for the manor. How would the growth of the food affect the manning? The crop rotation system was a major breakthrough. After the rise of agriculture, common peasants began eating the ham, carrots, acorns, fish, and mollusks at mealtime. Salt was like what is gold today, scarce. Salt was used as a preservative for meats. Sure enough, the lords and nobles taxed serfs a lot for it. Either pay the expensive price for salt or eat rotten meat. Feudalism became a scheme between the wealthy landowner, who enjoyed a good, hearty, meat-filled meal, and the poor serf, who usually ate nothing more than dark bread and old cheese. In 1857 AD, a disease known as the Black Death broke out. Peasants started dying because ergots, a fungus, began rotting in their bread.
Ew. Entertainment in a serf's life.
When the time came, and everyone and anyone could come together to celebrate. For instance, on Christmas, Easter, May Day, the wedding, and the funeral of someone important. What is considered as cruel today would have been the form of entertainment in the medieval times. For example, dancing bears and monkeys would perform. At midsummer, villagers would light a bonfire, and it would symbolize the returning of the ripening fruit for next summer.
Education for serfs.
In 1330, only 5% of the population could read or write. This meant that serfs were illiterates, and some nobles even banned them from learning to read or write.
The jobs of a serf.
The main purpose of a serf was to do the dirty work that the rest of the people in the manor felt as though was on too low of a level for them to do. And the serf community worked at different times of the year to make sure that all they owed to the Lord was paid. They worked the land for the Lord. They paid taxes to him, and kind of like we do today. Everyone pays taxes, not just the lowest of the people. Serfs usually farmed for the Lord as a way of thanking him for the land that they used. This was an all-year job. Whatever was produced on the land, the peasants would pay taxes on. Much like how some people pay the rent for their house they live in, peasants had to pay rent for the land they lived and worked on. In the event of the attack, if there weren't enough men in the army, the lord of the manor would call some serfs to come and fight. This would only be in dire need of more men. The serfs would already have organized a plan of attack.
Duties of a serf.
Serfs were not slaves. They could not be bought or sold. Serfs couldn't leave without permission from the king. A serf's life was all about work. If they didn't work, they would be punished. Serfs were assigned jobs by the king. Serfs had to labor the Lord's domain for 2 to 3 days each week. The different jobs of a serf was craftsmen, farmers, bakers, tax collectors, plowing, and harvesting. Serfs did extra work to get paid more. The payment was eggs, money, grain, honey, and produce.
Farming. Rent.
I'm looking for my rent. Where is it? But sir, all I have is this rice.
And you grew that rice on my fields, so that's mine. Yeah, it's more like it. This is my rice because you grew it on my land. Defense. My lord, I'm gonna fight for you. Ah! Okay. Manual labor. Taxes. Serfs were taxed based on income, and my income is grains of rice, so I have to pay a tithe or 1/10, which is basically what I have here, and my portion of income is very small, so I basically am giving food for like a day or a week to the church. Cooking. Collecting berries and herbs. Oh, look at these ripe berries I picked today and these fresh herbs. Weaving clothes. Look at this amazing sweater I made. I stitched it from wool and fabric, and it is just my size. Look at this. The Black Death. By 1347, the plague had reached Europe. Symptoms included painful swelling, high fever, vomiting, muscular pains, bleeding in the lungs, hallucinations. Imagine that. No medicine could overcome it. Once they started spitting blood, death was meant to come soon. Disease spread by fleas and rats. Called the Black Death because skin would turn black all of a sudden. There was no cure for it. 1 of 3 people were infected with this disease. In the end, about 32 million people died overall. There are 3 different kinds of the plague. The bubonic, which the mortality rate is 30 to 70%. The pneumonic, which the mortality rate is 90 to 95%. And the septimic, which the mortality rate is 100%. The social effects on Europe were that it caused marriage rate to rise and birth rate to rise, but it also increased violence. The economic effect on Europe was that everybody was overspending and inflation, and there was shortage of laborers. The effects on the church were that it lost many of its followers, and that because most of the priests were either dead or wounded, there were only less educated priests, and then it was the resentment of the church because they thought that this was all an act of God.